Hello and welcome to Arnie's Short Stories. I hope you enjoy this story. I'm going to try and upload a new story each day. The Screaming Woods. The dense forest loomed over Holly Arnold as she stepped off the marked trail. She tightened her backpack straps, glancing over her shoulder to make sure her hiking buddy, Sam, was close behind. The air was thick with mist, and the faint, eerie whispers of the trees crept around them. Somewhere in the depths of this forest, locals said, there was a haunted village, a place lost to time, swallowed by the woods, and ruled by something dark. Holly had heard the rumors, too, but that's all she thought they were stories. She had grown up on the Isle of Wight, where legends like this drifted around every old ruin and forgotten path. But this was different. The Screaming Woods had a reputation that stuck, a whispered warning from every villager: don't go looking for the village, and whatever you do, ignore the screams. All ready? Sam whispered, his voice tense. Holly nodded, feeling a chill despite the warmth of the early autumn sun. They started down an unmarked path that she'd discovered on an old map. After a few hours of weaving between twisted oaks and undergrowth, the path had all but disappeared, but Holly pressed on, driven by curiosity and an odd, nagging pull toward the forest depths. As they walked, the forest grew unnaturally silent. The usual rustling of animals, the chirping of birds, all of it faded, leaving them in a silence so profound it seemed to vibrate against their eardrums. Holly was about to suggest they turn back when a piercing scream tore through the air, echoing between the trees. Ah? Sam breathed, clutching Holly's arm. She froze, trying to rationalize the sound. It couldn't be a person, could it? No, it had to be some kind of animal. But then it came again, louder this time, filled with pain and desperation. It was human. There was no mistaking it. Without a word, Holly started walking toward the sound. Sam tried to stop her, but she shook him off, her heart pounding with a strange mixture of fear and fascination. They pushed through the dense brush, following the screams as they grew louder, closer, until they reached a clearing. In the center of the clearing lay a crumbling, decayed village. The buildings were barely more than skeletons of wood and stone, overgrown with vines and moss. But there was something else, too, a heavy, suffocating atmosphere that clung to the air, thick and oppressive. It felt as though the forest itself was watching them. As they approached the edge of the village, Holly noticed figures moving between the dilapidated buildings. Pale, almost translucent forms that glided silently, ignoring them entirely. Her skin prickled as she realized they were not living people, they were spirits, trapped in some kind of eternal loop. "Look," Sam whispered. A young woman in a tattered dress staggered out of a crumbling house, her face twisted in agony. She clutched her throat as if struggling for air, then let out another blood-curdling scream before collapsing to the ground and vanishing. Holly felt her heart race, and a deep sense of dread washed over her. These spirits, they weren't just haunting this place. They were reliving their final moments, trapped in a cycle of endless suffering. Ah? Holly murmured, but the answer seemed to hang in the air, heavy with the weight of old secrets. As they moved deeper into the village, the screams grew louder, overlapping until they became a cacophony of anguish. Holly tried to block it out, but the sound crawled into her mind, suffocating her thoughts. Every house they passed had its own horrors, each spirit replaying their death in a macabre, twisted performance. Then she noticed a tin old well in the center of the village square. Unlike the other buildings, it looked untouched by time, its stone wall smooth and unblemished. Something about it felt wrong, as if it were a wound in the world itself. Holly couldn't explain why, but she felt compelled to approach it. "Holly, we should go," Sam said. "But this place, it's not right." She leaned over the edge of the well, peering into its depths. The darkness inside seemed endless, but she could feel something looking back at her, something ancient and hungry. And then she heard a voice soft, whispering her name from the darkness below. "Join us, Holly," it murmured. Suddenly, hands pale, decayed, and skeletal reached out from the well, clawing at her, pulling her closer to the edge. She struggled, but the hands were impossibly strong. Sam grabbed her arm, trying to pull her back, but the hands only tightened, dragging her closer to the darkness. The screams around them grew louder, merging into one agonized wail that filled the air. Holly felt herself slipping, her strength fading as the hands pulled her down, deeper and deeper. Just as she was about to lose herself to the darkness, she managed one last desperate scream. And then silence. When Holly opened her eyes, she was standing in the village square. The well was gone and the village was silent. She turned, searching for Sam, but he was nowhere to be seen. She tried to call his name, but no sound came out. Panic flooded her as she realized she couldn't speak, she couldn't scream. Holly looked around, and that's when she saw them, the villagers, staring at her with hollow, lifeless eyes. She felt a horrible understanding settle over her. She was one of them now, trapped in this cursed place, condemned to relive her final moments, her last scream echoing through the forest for eternity. Somewhere in the distance, she heard footsteps, the sound of hikers approaching. Holly felt the scream rising within her, a desperate plea for help, but no sound escaped her lips. She could only watch, helpless, as the forest prepared to claim its next victims. Holly tried to move, to wave her arms, anything to warn the approaching hikers. But her body was no longer her own. She was frozen, her gaze locked on the path winding through the trees, where faint figures in the distance moved closer with every step. Each scream in the air belonged to a soul trapped here, just like her, a warning that no one ever heard in time. Now she was part of the twisted symphony, a silent scream swallowed by the forest's endless hunger. The hikers entered the clearing, their faces wary as they took in the ruined village. Holly's heart ached, her silent voice screaming out, but they were oblivious, laughing nervously, muttering something about ghost stories and a bit of fun. She could do nothing as they crossed the village threshold, stepping into the place of no return. They began to explore, their eyes widening at the sight of the ghostly figures drifting past. The hikers seemed intrigued, snapping photos, unknowingly sealing their fate with each click of their cameras. The spirits around Holly stirred, restless, watching these newcomers with a dark, eager intensity. The forest was hungry, and it had waited long enough. A cold wind swept through the trees, making the leaves shiver and the air grow thick with a suffocating heaviness. Holly could feel it, the force that ruled this place waking, pulling her, commanding her to fulfill her new purpose. It was a compulsion, a need, driving her forward as if she were a puppet on strings. She fought it, her mind reeling with the horror of what she was about to do, but her body moved without her will, gliding silently toward the hikers. One of the hikers, a young woman with wide, curious eyes, noticed Holly approaching. She gasped, stumbling backward, her eyes filling with dread as she saw Holly's hollow gaze, her silent scream. But the darkness that held Holly would not let her stop. It wanted fear. It wanted terror. Without warning, one of the hikers, the young woman, let out a scream, a piercing cry that echoed through the village and struck Holly to her core. In that moment she saw herself in the girl's eyes, felt the fear she had once felt, and it tore at what remained of her soul. But the force that held her did not care. It fed on fear, on the helplessness of the lost. The other hikers froze, their faces pale, as the young woman screamed again and backed away, her footsteps faltering. She stumbled toward the old well, her hand brushing against its cold stone rim. The forest seemed to tremble with anticipation. In a cruel, familiar rhythm, hands, those same decayed, skeletal hands that had claimed Holly, began to rise from the well, reaching out with relentless, merciless intent. They wrapped around the young woman's ankles, her arms, pulling her toward the darkness below. The girl's friends grabbed her, pulling back with all their strength, but it was useless. The well would take what it wanted, and the village would claim yet another soul. And Holly watched, powerless, as the horror played out, as screams mingled with the village's own tormented cries, filling the air in a haunting, eternal symphony. She was a part of it now, just another lost soul, trapped in the screaming woods, waiting for her next victim to arrive. In the centuries to come, the forest would only grow denser, the village's memory fading into obscurity in the outside world. But the screaming woods would remain, its hidden horrors lying in wait, drawing in the curious and the foolish, ready to add new voices to its eternal, tortured choir. And Holly, now a fixture of the haunted village, would be there to welcome them. Forever waiting, forever screaming in silence. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoy this story. Please don't forget to like, and even better, like and subscribe. Thank you very much, and I hope you have had a great day.